Hi, I'm Karen Cotter, and I'm going to talk to you today about engaging the 21st century learner. My goal today during this presentation is to talk a little bit about how we can examine a project-based lesson approach and how it engages 21st century students through technology, the use of differentiation, the ability to differentiate between whatever we're doing in our project, and to have a minute for you to think about, or longer than a minute for you to think about how you could reimagine your lessons used in a project-based lesson approach. So had we been in person, I would have had you go to Poll Everywhere, and I would ask you, what does a 21st century learner look like? What do they look like in a classroom, in a situation where they're learning something? What do they look like to you? And I took it upon myself to find a word cloud that might have reflected what you would have written in your answers or your responses. And learning and student learning, I think, is at the center of it. Student engagement, they're busy, they're using technology, they're interacting with the teacher, they're interacting with one another, and the tools that we have for them to work with to learn and engage in 21st century learning. So student engagement does look like students are paying attention, whether it's to one another, whether it's to what you're talking to them about. They're curious, they're asking questions, and they're interested. They want to know more. They might not just leave your classroom and forget about it. They might go home and talk to their parents or talk to other students about it. Or, the next student will come in and say, hey, I heard we're talking about blah, 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 or we're going to do this. They're excited. They're motivated. And when they're motivated, we know that that's a predictor of academic achievement. So it influences the amount of time they spend learning and the amount of engagement that they spend. So it's important to motivate them in order for them to learn. As educators, our job is to make sure we support this through a lot of different ways in our teaching practice. We're using technology strategies, whether we're using old ones, whether we're always trying new ones, whether we're taking suggestions from students. It's important to continue to keep those tools and that technology up to date, or at least innovative in some way. Incorporating them in your activities, whether it's something you're doing regularly, how can you use a technology tool to make that work better? Whether we're learning in a blended situation, if we're working face-to-face, if we're working online, which we've had a lot of chance to do. I want to take a minute to look at the SAMR model, which talks about different technology levels and how we use technology as a substitution, for example, with Google Docs. So most everybody uses Google Docs now, so they're using technology in the level, and that's a substitution level, and that's okay. They're still using something, but we want to think about other ways that we can transform the use of technology to create something that was inconceivable before. Whether students are coming up with something or you have something that you can share with them, or anything in between. Every technology that you use isn't going to be one level. They're depending on the project, depending on what you want from it. You might be at a different level or a different area here, whether you're just enhancing or you're working through the transformation piece. So Ben Franklin many years ago said, "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, and involve me and I learn." And with project-based lessons, that's what's happening on a number of levels. You're reeling them in, you're getting them interested because it's an authentic and relevant problem or issue that they can kind of sink their teeth into. We have the pandemic now. It's a huge, obviously, thing that we're dealing with, and we will be dealing with for a while. We have Black Lives Matter, we have climate change, we have all kinds of issues that we could use on any level in any subject to get students involved and interested. This allows also for differentiation. How can you do that? Students have different learning styles and different learning methods, and so we can do differentiation when we have this kind of a project, because it's not just one way or not any way at all. You can connect it with other disciplines, which will often help students connect, because if they don't like science, and maybe if they're writing about it in English or they're having a debate in social studies about similar issues, they can connect those things and it becomes more interesting to them. And the teacher as a facilitator is a huge one, to be able to go to students' tables or their groups and talk to them, engage them, and see what they're good at. And it really is a one-to-one interaction, and it's much more intimate with students when you can do that. And it's a lovely way to really get students, find out what they're good at and what their talents are and how they can work with one another and how they can play off of one another to be their best learner. And then problem-based lessons and projects also engage the 4 C's, which are one of the big pushes for 21st century learning. The fact that students need to leave being able to communicate, that they can collaborate with one another, that they're critically thinking about solving problems and coming up with an answer or an innovation to help, and to be creative about that. There's those 4 learning pieces are so important and very much integrated with a project-based lesson. So how do we do that? How do we get there? What does it look like? I'm going to talk about the specific science project or science project that we worked on and made it relevant. So I started off with something that's relevant, looking for something that's going to engage students and get them interested right away. Whether it was Hurricane Sandy or now the pandemic, for sure, food isn't always in the top of the news. And how are we going to feed people? And how do we feed ourselves and our family when things are limited? How can we get a fresh supply of food? What can we do? So you craft a story or an important narrative that will allow you to present the final project, which is to, in this case, design an aesthetically pleasing food-growing structure out of recycled materials. We're building a greenhouse. And they were like, are we building a greenhouse? We are. So in science, we use a design process. I think there's this process, whether it's engineering design process or design process, is just a way that we look at problems. And I tell them we do this all the time anyway. When you're thinking about what to wear, you think, well, what's the weather going to be? You think of a lot of different things and kind of pull information in and then come up with that. We're going to do the same thing using the engineering design process. We're going to identify greenhouses, understand how they work. We're going to research using computers. We may tap the librarians for resources that they have. And then students are going to come up with an idea of what their greenhouse might look like. How could I build it? Out of what recycled materials are going to be the best? All of that's research, and you're using your computer at a basic level to substitute for going to the library and pulling things off the shelf. Next, I have them, or you can have them design something. In this case, they're going to draw a greenhouse. Well, I can't draw, so what are we going to do? Well, you could have them draw because some people will. It allows them, again, to differentiate. But you could also use something like Google Draw. So if you go to a greenhouse sketch and they can't draw, what they can do is they can use the Google Draw and they can create what their greenhouse looks like. They can import pieces of pictures, or they use the draw tool. They can list materials. They can talk about what they're going to use. They could put measurements on this. There's so many different ways they could use this particular application in just the first 2 steps, or the first step. Brainstorming with one another, looking things up, researching on the internet. Finally, a prototype is come up with. After everybody has an idea for their greenhouse, you put them, they're in their groups and they're talking about, this is my idea, what's your idea? They're learning to collaborate with one another and coming up with a design in which they make a prototype. The prototype is then tested, and they're going to go ahead and see how it's working. This greenhouse here has a probe in it which measures carbon dioxide or oxygen levels, so that connects right to their computer and gives them real-time data. They can see what the levels are, they can measure their plant and decide if, as the plant grows, is it producing more oxygen, and that is real-time data that's coming onto their screen, and they can save that and store it, and we can look at it later and really compare one day to another. So they're working like real scientists using tools. This is a transformational kind of a tool, because to do this in years past, it just wouldn't work as well. So it's a great opportunity for them to do that. And then they iterate and they continue to remake it, looking at others' greenhouses, and maybe their plant's a little taller, or what did you do? And this person has blue plastic. Maybe that's a better idea. So they continue to work on that and communicate with one another and redesign and work on what they're doing so they can just get the best. And at some point it has to end. And the communication to the rest of the class, they're sharing their ideas. We're looking at how big plants got and what happened is, and why did yours work better than mine. So those are all ways that we can use that process. And in that process, there's so many other types of technology you can use, whether you're taking pictures with an iPad or a Chromebook, or you're documenting it, you have a science notebook online, or you're working on something like that. There's just a number of different ways you can use different levels of technology to substitute and all the way up to reimagine, whether it's taking a video of how it's built and then speeding it up. So engaging 21st century learners, you hear things like, is class over? I don't want to go. I don't want to leave. The class goes so quickly. I talked to my parents last night about it. This is what we were talking about. Or the next class comes in and they're excited to start because they know what they've heard in the hallways. So you know when students are engaged. They want to be there. They don't go to the bathroom. They're working. They're working with each other. They're curious. They're paying attention. And they're certainly engaged. So in closing, STEM offers, or specifically project-based learning, but in this case a STEM project, offers a variety of ways to engage 21st century learning for students who are born into technology. These 21st century students are born into technology, but just because they were born into technology doesn't mean they know how to use it or use it appropriately or in particular settings. We were born having books all around. It doesn't mean you can read. You have to learn to use those tools to your benefit. What works? So collaboration, communication, being creative, thinking critically are all things that project-based lessons, and especially in this case a STEM lesson, allows you to use all of those skills. So I'd like you to think about how you could reimagine your lesson or a unit in your own subject. How might you work with another discipline to even just a little bit, so that just starting small to build on what you have already, because you have plenty of activities already. You've been doing this for a long time. You can work to use technology to enhance what you're doing and add new ways to differentiate your activities so everybody has a chance to engage and really learn about it. So I want to thank you for joining me, and happy to take any questions. I look forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and have a great night.